My ex told everyone I was unstable. I got stable, he got worse. I'm standing in the lobby of a building I used to be too afraid to walk into. Marble floors, glass elevators, my name on a badge that says director instead of the name people used to say with a question mark after it. Maya? Is she okay? There's a man across the room I haven't seen in 3 years. He's wearing a suit that doesn't fit him the way it used to. His eyes find me before I find him, and I watch something in his face fall apart in real time. That specific kind of shock that only happens when someone realizes the story they told about you was wrong the entire time. I don't run to him. I don't ignore him either. I just nod, once, the way you'd nod a stranger holding a door. 3 years ago, this man stood in front of our mutual friends, our families, people I'd known since college, and he told them I was unstable. Not sad, not hurting, unstable. A word that follows you. A word that makes people quietly stop inviting you to things, that makes people speak to you slower, that makes people believe they were smart to leave before you got worse. I didn't scream. I didn't fight back. I didn't post a single word about it online. I just became someone he never expected. Tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly how that happened. The 2 years of silence, the mornings I didn't want to get out of bed, the version of me that almost believed him, and the version of me that decided, quietly, without telling anyone, that I was going to build a life so undeniable that his words would stop meaning anything at all. This isn't a story about getting even. It's a story about becoming. And if you're in your own lowest point right now, if someone convinced you that you were the broken one, I need you to stay until the end. Because I promise you, what happened to me can happen to you too. Before I go back to the beginning, I want to say this clearly because I think it gets lost in stories like mine. This story isn't about revenge. It's about becoming. Revenge is loud. Revenge needs an audience. Revenge needs the other person to know they lost. What I'm going to walk you through tonight is quieter than that. And honestly, it's more powerful than anything I could have said to his face that day he humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. If this is your first time here, I tell true, deeply personal transformation stories. The kind where nobody throws a drink, nobody has a dramatic showdown, but everybody ends up changed anyway. If that's the kind of story that speaks to you, hit subscribe because I have a lot more of these, and I read every comment you leave me. Okay, let's go back to where it started, to the version of me who believed him. I need to tell you who I was before, because you can't understand the after without it. I was 28 years old, and I had spent 6 years of my life, my entire mid-20s, the years people tell you are supposed to be your best, organizing my identity around one relationship. His name was Derek. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner when I was 22, and within 3 months, I had, without really noticing it happening, started shrinking. Not physically. I mean, the version of me that used to have opinions about where we ate, what shows we watched, what my Saturday looked like. That version got quieter every year. By the time I was 27, I had stopped noticing I was doing it. I thought that was just what a mature relationship looked like: compromise, flexibility, putting someone else first. What it actually was, I understand now, was a slow erosion. And Derek was good, genuinely skilled at making the erosion feel like it was my idea. Here's an example, one of hundreds I could give you. I got a promotion offer at 26, a regional coordinator role that would have meant relocating for 18 months, a huge resume builder, the kind of opportunity people wait years for. I came home that night practically vibrating with excitement. Derek listened to the whole thing, then he said, very calmly, "I just don't think you're built for that kind of pressure right now. Remember what happened last time work got intense?" Last time. He was referring to a period maybe 8 months earlier when I'd had a rough few weeks. Some anxiety, some trouble sleeping, completely normal human stuff during a stressful quarter at work. I had cried in front of him twice that month. That was it. That was the entire evidence file. But he said it with such certainty. Remember what happened last time? That I started to doubt my own memory of my own resilience. I turned the promotion down. I told my manager I wasn't ready. I was ready. I was more than ready. I just didn't believe it anymore because the person closest to me had spent years quietly convincing me that I was one bad week away from falling apart. That's the thing nobody tells you about this kind of relationship. It's not one big cruel moment. If it were, you'd leave immediately. It's 1,000 small moments where someone edits your self-perception one sentence at a time, until the person doing the editing is the only one you trust to tell you who you are. My friends started noticing before I did. My best friend, Priya, pulled me aside at a birthday dinner, mine actually, my 27th, and said, "You used to have so much to say. Where did you go?" I laughed it off. I said I was just tired, work was busy. You know how it is. I didn't have language for what was happening to me yet. I just knew that somewhere in the last 5 years, I had gone from a woman who applied to grad school on a whim and got in, to a woman who ran every decision, what to wear to a work event, whether to take a weekend trip with friends, whether my own feelings were an overreaction, through a filter that wasn't mine. The catalyst, the moment that should have broken me completely, happened on a Tuesday in March at his sister's engagement party. We'd been fighting quietly for weeks. I had started in small ways, pushing back, asking for things, saying, actually, I'd rather not, instead of just going along. Derek did not like this new version of me. He never said that directly, he was too careful for that, but I felt the temperature change in the relationship. He got colder, more clipped, more prone to these long, meaningful silences that I now understand were a kind of punishment. At the party, I had 2 glasses of wine. 2, I remember counting because I remember thinking about it afterward, replaying it, trying to find the crime in it. And I got into a slightly too loud conversation with his cousin about a work conflict I was navigating. Nothing scandalous, nothing embarrassing, just a woman talking with her hands, a little too animated, a little too honest about how frustrating her manager had been. Derek pulled me aside in the hallway outside the bathroom. "You need to calm down," he said. "People are noticing. You get like this." You get like this. 3 words that erased 6 years of me being by every actual measure an unusually steady and reliable person, the friend everyone called during their crises, the daughter who managed her parents' finances, the coworker who trained new hires because she was so calm under pressure. I remember standing in that hallway and feeling something crack open in my chest. Not anger yet, just this cold, sinking recognition. He thinks I'm the unstable one. And if he thinks it, other people probably do too. I was right to be afraid of that. 2 weeks later, we broke up. He ended it, framing it as though he was protecting himself, protecting his family from the ups and downs. And in the weeks after, I started hearing things. A friend mentioned carefully, gently, that Derek had told his sister I'd had an episode at the engagement party. Another friend said he'd told a mutual group chat that he was worried about me, that he'd tried to get me help, that he didn't want to say too much, but he thought I needed space to work on myself. He never called me crazy directly. That would have been too obvious, too easy to disprove. He was smarter than that. He used the softer words, unstable, fragile, going through something, the kind of words that sound like concern from the outside, but function on the inside like a slow, deniable character assassination. I lost people. Not everyone, but enough. A friend group we'd shared stopped including me in things to keep it low-key, which I later learned meant they'd sided quietly with the version of the story where I was the unwell one and he was the patient, worried ex trying to do right by me. My own cousin at a family gathering asked me with real concern in her voice if I was doing better now, and I realized in that moment that the story had traveled further than I understood. It wasn't just Derek's friends, it was my family, hearing a version of my own life that I hadn't written and couldn't seem to correct. I want to be honest with you about how that period felt, because I think glow-up stories sometimes skip this part, and it's the part that matters most. It felt like drowning quietly in a room full of people who thought you were fine. I would go to work, function, smile, answer emails, and then get in my car in the parking garage and sit there for 20 minutes before I could drive because the effort of appearing okay all day had used up something I didn't know how to refill. I stopped sleeping well. I started, for the first time in my life, actually wondering if he was right, if there was something wrong with me that I just couldn't see, the way people with poor eyesight don't know colors look different to everyone else. That's the part I need you to sit with for a second. The words that were supposed to break me, unstable, fragile, needs space to work on herself, they almost worked. Not because they were true, because I had spent 6 years training myself to believe someone else's version of me over my own. But here's the thing about hitting an actual bottom, the real kind, not the dramatic movie kind. It's disorienting and it's dark, but it's also, strangely, the first honest floor you've stood on in years. Because from that hallway conversation onward, I no longer had the luxury of managing his perception of me. I'd already failed at that. The story was already out there. Whatever I did next, I was doing it without an audience I was performing for. And that, it turns out, is exactly the kind of freedom you need to actually start over. I didn't know it yet. Sitting in that parking garage, crying into a steering wheel at 28 years old, wondering if the man who broke me was also right about me, I did not feel free. I felt like the floor had opened up and I was still falling. But something in me, some small, stubborn, unimpressive thing, refused to fully believe him. Not loudly, not with a speech, just a quiet, flickering thought that kept returning no matter how many times I tried to talk myself out of it. I don't think that's actually who I am. That thought was the first brick. I want to tell you about the exact night I decided to change, because I've thought about it a lot since, and I think the decision itself is less dramatic than people expect. There was no lightning bolt, no screaming into a pillow movie montage moment. It was a Sunday night, about 5 weeks after the breakup. I was sitting on my couch, alone, in the same sweatpants I'd worn most of that week, and I opened my banking app to check something and saw the balance in my savings account. A number that had barely moved in years, because for 6 years, our financial decisions had somehow always ended up benefiting his timeline, his goals, his comfort. And I thought, very plainly, not even emotionally, I don't know this person's plans for her own life anymore. I need to find out what she wants. I want to be precise about something. I did not decide to change to prove Derek wrong. I want to say that clearly because it matters and because I think it's the actual hinge this whole story turns on. If I had built the next 2 years of my life around him, around what he'd think when he saw it, I would have built something hollow, something dependent on his attention for its meaning. What I actually decided on that couch, in those sweatpants, was smaller and much more durable. I want to know who I am when no one is editing me. The first thing I did wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a boot camp or a rebrand. I made an appointment with a therapist, the first one I'd ever seen, because I needed a professional, neutral person to help me sort through a genuinely confusing question. Was I actually unstable? I needed to know, for my own sanity, whether there was truth buried in what he'd said or whether I'd been the target of a slow campaign to make me doubt myself. That first session, I remember telling her the story, the promotion I turned down, the hallway conversation, the episode that was 2 glasses of wine and an animated conversation about a difficult boss, and I remember her going quiet for a second before she said, What you're describing isn't instability. It's a pattern of someone systematically undermining your confidence until you couldn't trust your own perception anymore. That has a name. It's called gaslighting, and it's common, and it is not a reflection of who you actually are. I cried in that office in a way I hadn't let myself cry in front of Derek in years. Because for 6 years, I had learned that crying was evidence against me. In that small, beige office, for the first time, it was just evidence that I was human. I want to walk you through the next 18 months honestly, because I went to therapy and got a promotion doesn't capture what it actually took. This was slow. This was unglamorous. This was, for long stretches, genuinely boring in the way that real change usually is. I started therapy weekly, then every other week once I had more tools. I read, obsessively, almost academically, about relationship patterns, about self-trust, about the specific psychology of how people lose themselves inside relationships that erode them slowly instead of all at once. I wasn't trying to build a business plan for revenge. I was trying to build a working manual for how to trust myself again. I started small, absurdly small, honestly. I began making tiny decisions on purpose, just to practice hearing my own voice, what to order at a restaurant without triangulating it through someone else's preference, what to watch on a Friday night, whether to go for a run or skip it. It sounds almost silly to say out loud, but after years of outsourcing my instincts, relearning to trust "I want this" as a complete sentence took actual, deliberate practice. Financially, I got serious in a way I never had before. I sat down with every subscription, every recurring charge, every habit I'd built during the relationship, and I rebuilt a budget from scratch, one that reflected my goals, not the vague shared someday goals that had always somehow prioritized his timeline. Within 4 months, I'd built a real emergency fund for the first time in my adult life, about $6,000, which doesn't sound dramatic, but represented the first time in 6 years that my safety net wasn't tangled up with someone else's approval of me. At work, I asked a meeting with my manager and told her honestly that I'd turned down growth opportunities in the past out of fear, and that I wanted to be considered for the next one that came up. 6 weeks later, a team lead position opened, smaller than the relocation opportunity I'd turned down at 26, but real, with actual direct reports and actual budget responsibility. I applied. I got it. I want to be honest about the setbacks too, because this wasn't a clean upward line. There was a stretch around month 7 where I had what I can only describe as a full relapse into old thought patterns. A guy I'd started casually dating made an offhand comment, something completely mundane. "You seem a little intense about this." And it sent me into a 2-day spiral where I was convinced, all over again, that I was fundamentally too much, too unstable, too something for anyone to want. I called my therapist in a panic. She helped me see what had actually happened. An ordinary, forgettable comment had landed on an old bruise, and the bruise, not the comment, was doing the talking. That was an important lesson, and it took me most of that year to really absorb it. Healing isn't a straight staircase. It's closer to spiral stairs. You pass the same emotional floor multiple times. Choice, job change I'd heard about turned into a pattern. 2 roles in 2 years, both ending in ways people described vaguely. The kind of vagueness that tells you everything by refusing to tell you anything specific. His engagement to the woman he dated after me had ended. He'd moved back in with his parents for a stretch, something a mutual friend mentioned almost as an aside, the way you'd mention a minor inconvenience, not realizing how much weight it carried for a man who used to speak with such total borrowed authority about who was and wasn't stable enough. I'm not telling you this to gloat. I want to be honest about that too. There's a version of this story that leans hard into his downfall as the satisfying part, and I understand the appeal of that version, but it's not actually the truest part of what I felt standing in that lobby. What I felt, mostly, was distance. The specific, clean distance of someone looking at a chapter of a book they've already finished reading. He crossed the lobby toward me. I could see him deciding to do it, that particular hesitation people have when they're choosing to walk into a conversation they're not sure they're prepared for. "Maya, wow, you look really good, really different." I said thank you, just that. I didn't elaborate, didn't soften it with a joke, didn't fill the silence like I used to, out of some old reflex to manage his comfort in the conversation. He asked what I was doing there. I told him briefly, director now, leading a program overhaul, the company's biggest initiative this year. I watched something shift in his face as I said it, a kind of recalibration, like he was quietly updating a file he'd kept closed for years. That's really great," he said. And then, after a pause that went on a beat too long, "I think about that time a lot, actually. I wasn't in a good place. I said some things I probably shouldn't have." I want to be honest about what almost happened in that pause, because I think it's important. There was a version of me, the version from month 7, the one who spiraled for 2 days over an offhand comment from a near stranger, who might have needed that apology desperately, who might have stood there hoping he'd keep going, hoping he'd finally, fully say the specific words, "I told people you were unstable and it wasn't true," who might have needed that correction from him to feel like the record was finally set straight. But standing there in that lobby, in the blazer I'd bought myself, with a title I'd earned through 2.5 years of private, unglamorous work, I realized something with total clarity. I didn't need it anymore. The record didn't need him to correct it. I had already corrected it. One Saturday run, one late-night study session, one honest therapy hour at a time. His apology, half-formed as it wasn't a gift I needed. It was just information, a small, sad footnote to a story that was mostly, by now, about someone else. And that's when everything started to change. Not because of one dramatic moment, because of the accumulation of 1,000 small, private ones. The emergency fund, the team lead title, the Saturday runs, the certification, the letters I didn't send. Somewhere in that first year, without a single confrontation, without him even knowing any of it was happening, I stopped being a woman defined by what someone else had said about her and started being a woman who simply had a life, full, specific, hers. I still remember the exact morning I noticed the shift. I was getting dressed for work, for a presentation I was leading to senior leadership about a process overhaul my team had built, and I caught my reflection in the mirror and thought, clearly, calmly, without any drama attached to it at all, I like her. I actually like who this is. That sentence, more than any promotion or paycheck, was the real turning point of this entire story. By the start of year 2, the changes weren't private anymore. They were visible, and people who hadn't spoken to me in a while started noticing in ways that felt, honestly, a little surreal after so long feeling invisible in my own life. Let me give you the concrete picture, because I think specifics matter more than vague inspiration. Professionally, I'd gone from an individual contributor with no direct reports to a team lead managing 5 people to, by month 19, a promotion to program director overseeing 3 teams and a budget in the high 6 figures. My salary had increased by almost 70% in under 2 years, not because I got lucky, but because I'd finally started applying for things I was qualified for, instead of pre-rejecting myself on someone else's behalf. Physically and in terms of health, I'd run my first half marathon at month 14, something the old me would have found almost unimaginable, not because of fitness, but because of the belief that any goal that big was too risky to attempt in case I failed and spiraled. I finished in 2 hours and 11 minutes. I cried at the finish line, not from exhaustion, but because Priya was there holding a sign with my name on it, and it was the first time in years someone had shown up specifically, publicly, to watch me succeed at something I'd chosen for myself. Financially, that $6,000 emergency fund had grown into a genuine safety net, enough that for the first time in my adult life, a bad month at work or an unexpected expense didn't send me into a spiral of dependency-based fear. I'd also quietly started investing, something I let Derek handle for both of us for years without ever fully understanding our shared accounts. Learning to manage my own money wasn't glamorous. It was spreadsheets and slow, boring compound growth, but it was mine. The invisible changes mattered more, honestly, than any of the visible ones. I stopped bracing. I didn't realize how much of my daily energy for years had gone into pre-managing other people's reactions to me, softening opinions before I voiced them, rehearsing explanations in case someone thought I was too much. Somewhere in that second year, I noticed I'd stopped doing that. I said what I thought in meetings. I disagreed with people, respectfully, without spending the rest of the day anxious about whether they now saw me as difficult. I dated, casually, and when a man in his 30s made a comment that echoed, faintly, some old dynamic, trying to manage my mood, subtly implying I was a lot for having a clear opinion, I recognized it in real time, named it internally, and simply didn't see him again. No spiral, no 2-day crisis like the one from month 7, just clarity and a door quietly closing. I want to acknowledge something important here. This wasn't about becoming hard or unfeeling. If anything, I became more emotionally open during this period, not less. I just stopped confusing openness with self-abandonment. I could cry in front of people again without immediately cataloging it as evidence against my own stability. I could be moved by a sad movie, frustrated by a hard day, excited about something small, and none of it triggered the old fear that I was proving someone right about me. The first outside signs that people were noticing was at my cousin's wedding, about 16 months after the breakup. The same cousin who, a year earlier, had asked if I was doing better now, with that careful, concerned tone. This time, she pulled me aside during the reception and said, almost bewildered, "You seem so different. Good different. What happened to you?" I remember smiling and saying something simple. I just started doing things for myself because I genuinely didn't feel the need to give her the whole story. That itself was new. The old me would have needed her to understand everything, would have needed the record corrected in detail. The new me just let the visible change speak for itself. Word travels in shared social circles, even when you're not trying to make it travel. A mutual friend mentioned in passing that Derek had asked about me, a casual, "How's Maya doing these days?" kind of question that apparently surprised the friend because the last version of me he'd had access to was the one he'd described as needing to work on herself. Another friend told me, almost gossiping, that Derek's own life had gotten noticeably messier over that same stretch. A breakup with the woman he'd started seeing shortly after me, some tension with his family, a job change that people described carefully as not really his choice. I want to be honest with you. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that. I felt something quieter and, I think, healthier. A kind of neutral distance, like hearing news about a country I used to live in but don't have citizenship in anymore. And that's when everything started to change. Not in my circumstances anymore, but in something even more fundamental, my relationship to being seen at all. I stopped needing people to witness the glow up in real time. For most of year 1, if I'm honest, some small part of me had still been building this life with an imagined audience, imagining Derek's face if he could see the promotion, the half marathon medal, the new apartment I'd signed a lease on entirely by myself at month 20. By year 2, that imagined audience had quietly left the building. I wasn't building this for him to see. I had genuinely, finally, stopped performing for the story he'd told about me, because I had replaced it with a truer one, and the truer one didn't need his approval to be real. There's a specific memory from this period I want to share with you because it crystallizes the whole shift for me. It was a Tuesday evening, close to the 2-year mark since the breakup, and I was leading a training session for new hires at work. The exact kind of visible, high-pressure, public speaking role that the old me would have quietly avoided out of fear that I'd get like that I'd somehow prove Derek right in front of a room full of strangers. Halfway through the session, I made a small joke. The room laughed, and I felt this wave of something I can only describe as ease. Not adrenaline, not the anxious performance of competence, just ease. Like I was finally, fully occupying my own life instead of narrating it defensively from the sidelines. Afterward, one of the new hires, a woman about my age, came up and said, "You're really good at this. You make it look easy." I remember almost laughing because if she'd met me 2 years earlier in that parking garage, she would have met someone who could barely hold a coherent sentence together about her own worth, let alone teach a room full of strangers anything at all. I didn't know it yet, standing in that training room, but the encounter that would close this chapter of the story was only a few months away. The lobby I described at the very beginning of this video, the marble floors, the badge with director on it, Derek's face falling apart in real time, that happened almost exactly 2.5 years after the breakup at an industry conference neither of us had any reason to expect the other one at. I want to walk you through it slowly, because in the moment it happened fast, but afterward I replayed every second of it so many times that I remember it almost frame by frame. I was there representing my company, having just been promoted to director 3 weeks earlier, the culmination of 2.5 years of exactly the unglamorous private work I've described tonight. I was wearing a blazer I'd bought for myself with my own money at a store I used to think was too expensive for someone like me, a sentence I recognize now as one more small echo of years of being taught to want less. I turned a corner near the registration desk, and there he was. Derek looked, and I want to be careful and honest here, not cruel. Tired. Not dramatically ruined, not some cartoonish downfall, just tired, in that specific way people look when the story they've been telling about themselves has started to run out of runway. I later learned through the same mutual friend grapevine that had once carried his version of me, that the not really his choice job change I'd heard about turned into a pattern. 2 roles in 2 years, both ending in ways people described vaguely. The kind of vagueness that tells you everything by refusing to tell you anything specific. His engagement to the woman he dated after me had ended. He'd moved back in with his parents for a stretch, something a mutual friend mentioned almost as an aside, the way you'd mention a minor inconvenience, not realizing how much weight it carried for a man who used to speak with such total borrowed authority about who was and wasn't stable enough. I'm not telling you this to gloat. I want to be honest about that too. There's a version of this story that leans hard into his downfall as the satisfying part, and I understand the appeal of that version, but it's not actually the truest part of what I felt standing in that lobby. What I felt, mostly, was distance. The specific, clean distance of someone looking at a chapter of a book they've already finished reading. He crossed the lobby toward me. I could see him deciding to do it. That particular hesitation people have when they're choosing to walk into a conversation they're not sure they're prepared for. "Maya, wow, you look really good, really different." I said thank you, just that. I didn't elaborate, didn't soften it with a joke, didn't fill the silence like I used to, out of some old reflex to manage his comfort in the conversation. He asked what I was doing there. I told him briefly, director now, leading a program overhaul, the company's biggest initiative this year. I watched something shift in his face as I said it, a kind of recalibration, like he was quietly updating a file he'd kept closed for years. That's really great," he said, and then, after a pause that went on a beat too long, "I think about that time a lot, actually. I wasn't in a good place. I said some things I probably shouldn't have." I want to be honest about what almost happened in that pause, because I think it's important. There was a version of me, the version from month 7, the one who spiraled for 2 days over an offhand comment from a near stranger, who might have needed that apology desperately, who might have stood there hoping he'd keep going, hoping he'd finally, fully say the specific words, "I told people you were unstable and it wasn't true," who might have needed that correction from him to feel like the record was finally set straight. But standing there in that lobby, in the blazer I'd bought myself, with a title I'd earned through 2.5 years of private, unglamorous work, I realized something with total clarity. I didn't need it anymore. The record didn't need him to correct it. I had already corrected it. One Saturday run, one late-night study session, one honest therapy hour at a time. His apology, half-formed as it was, wasn't a gift I needed. It was just information, a small, sad footnote to a story that was mostly, by now, about someone else. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him, and I meant it genuinely, without bitterness. "I hope things get easier for you." That's it. That's the whole confrontation. No raised voices, no detailed accounting of the damage, no triumphant speech about everything I'd built. Just a simple, warm, slightly distant kindness. The kind you'd offer someone you used to know a long time ago in a different life. He seemed almost thrown by how little charge the moment carried for me. I think in some way he'd been braced for anger, maybe even wanted it. Anger would have meant he still had some kind of hold on my emotional weather. What he got instead was a woman who was simply, genuinely, moving on to the next item on her conference schedule. A few minutes later, before I walked into the first session of the day, he said, almost too casually, "Maybe we could get coffee sometime, catch up properly." I thought about it for exactly as long as it took to be honest with myself, which was not very long at all. "I don't think so," I said, still warm, still without any edge to it. "But I'm glad I ran into you. Take care of yourself, Derek." And I meant that too. I want to be clear about that, because I think it's the part of the story people sometimes have the hardest time believing. By that point, I actually did wish him well. Not because I'd forgotten what happened, not because it hadn't hurt, but because carrying resentment for him would have meant keeping a small, permanent room in my life reserved for a man who no longer had any real estate there. I walked into that conference session, sat down, opened my notebook, and felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as quiet. Not triumph, exactly. Something calmer than triumph. Something closer to completion. The realization that hit me somewhere around the second panel of the day was this. The entire 2.5 years, I'd told myself, in the honest parts of my own head, that I wasn't doing any of it for him. But some fractional, unconscious part of me had probably still been waiting for a moment exactly like the one in that lobby. Proof delivered directly that he'd been wrong and I'd been right. And now that the moment had actually happened, I understood something that no amount of imagining it in advance could have taught me. It didn't matter nearly as much as I'd expected it to. Not because the moment wasn't satisfying, it was in its own quiet way, but because the actual satisfaction, the actual foundation my whole life was now built on, had already been laid, brick by unglamorous brick, over 2.5 years, long before he ever walked back into a room with me in it. This was never about him seeing me differently. It was about me seeing me differently. He was just the last person to find out. Here's what I want to leave you with tonight, because I think it's the part that actually matters more than any single detail of what happened between me and Derek. The best revenge really is living well, but only if you're doing it for yourself. If you build your glow up as a performance for someone who hurt you, you're still handing them the steering wheel. You're still organizing your life around their eventual reaction. The version of this story that actually changed my life wasn't the lobby scene. It was the parking garage. It was the therapy office. It was the Saturday runs nobody was watching. It was the emergency fund I built with no plan to show anyone the number. If you're in your own version of that hallway right now, if someone convinced you that you're the unstable one, the too much one, the one who needs to be smaller and quieter and easier to manage, I want you to hear this clearly. That story is not the truth. It might be the loudest story in the room right now. It is not the truth. A few practical things if you're standing where I was standing. Get one honest, neutral person in your corner, a therapist, a counselor, someone with no stake in the old story about you. You need someone who can help you tell the difference between a real flaw and an old wound someone taught you to mistake for one. Rebuild in private before you rebuild in public. Nobody needs to witness your first attempt at anything. Let the early, clumsy, uncertain part of your comeback happen with the door closed. It'll be stronger for it. Track something concrete, a number in a savings account, a mile time, a certification, progress you can point to on your hardest days when your feelings lie to you and tell you nothing has changed. And when the encounter finally comes, because it usually does, eventually, in some form, let yourself be surprised by how small it feels. That's not a failure of the moment. That's proof you already won, a long time before you walked into that room. I didn't scream at Derek in that lobby. I didn't need to. My whole life had already said everything that needed saying. So tell me, what's your glow-up story? What's the sentence someone said about you that you turned into fuel instead of a life sentence? Put it in the comments below. I read every single one, and honestly, they're my favorite part of making these videos. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. I've got a lot more of these, and I'd love for you to be here for the next one. Take care of yourselves, and go build the version of your life that makes the old story irrelevant.